your resources. It's the time to craft your learning objective. And a good learning objective have the follow the SMART framework and have the HEART. And this is the SMART framework is very it's very old.
Oh, the SMART framework?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very old. I think it was done in the 1960. I learned it when I was in first year of college because I was learning education. And the HEART framework that I saw that in the book by Jim Quick, and in the textbook, in the workbook, I put a link to where you can see them like explained, but you don't need to go that right now. I am gonna explain in the context of learning languages. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. And HEART is time bound.
HEART.
And HEART is healthy, endearing, alluring, relevant, and truth. So this is SMART is kind of the light bulb because you want to be smart, but this HEART right here, you need to also make your heart happy. So, for example, you are gonna assess is your objective SMART. The first thing is we're gonna see like the measurable part. That's the M in SMART. So one example of an objective that is imprecise and non-measurable is I want to master English. If somebody go to me on the street and they say I want to master English, I'm gonna ask them like, what do you even mean?
So different things that you want to do require different levels of English. For instance, being able to just talk to a native English speaker, or it's a little bit more than being able to navigate in an English-speaking country. But being able to write in English may be a little bit more than that. And being able to teach is even more than that. And then being able to be considered like a U.S. citizen, like so people don't doubt it. That is an extremely high level. That's C2 level. But different things that you want to do may require different levels of mastery.
Yeah, so when I was talking about like the future self, you need to think about like what level of English does that future self that you imagined need.
This is the goal, the second part. If I could speak fluently, I would be able to do this.
Yes.
You can look at that and you can get an idea of like, this is how much English I would need to know in order to do this task.
Yeah, because you really need to know like where is the finish line. This is a marathon, but you need to know where is the finish line for you to know like, did I get it or not, and when I'm gonna get it. So an example of a specific and measurable objective will be, I want to be able to get a score of 8.5 on the IELTS test. Like, that's very specific. You want, and it's very measurable. Like, it's measurable because you need like, you have a score that you are aiming for. And it's specific because for you to get that 8.5 score on the IELTS test, there are already requirements about what does it look like, what does that level mean. They have like, okay, you should be this good in reading, you should be able to do this, you should have this specific level on speaking, so this is a good objective.
Yeah.
The next one is, when you have like a non-time bound objective, you are setting yourself for failure. So when you say, I'm going to speak English like a native speaker one day, that is like a red flag. You are not going to.
Even without the one day, I'm going to speak English like a native speaker, that's also not time bound. Saying just having the word day in there doesn't make it time bound.
Yeah. But a time bond will be by this month next year, I will be able to get a score of 8.5 on the IELTS. So that means if you write that down, next time, like you can go in a month, in 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, you can look at that. Am I there yet?
It helps a little bit with, I have a tendency to procrastinate. And so if I give myself like, okay, this is where I plan on being by the end of the month, then I know I have to achieve that by the end of the month. And if it's in 1 year, then I can start to say, okay, in 12 months, this is where I'm going to be. And this is about how much I should get through every month. And it makes it so then if you have that year-long goal, like something like by the time I graduate, I want to be able to do this, then you can see like, okay, this is how much I'm going to have to learn each month. And then you can even break it down. This is what I'm going to have to learn each week. It's a little bit easier with something with Duolingo or something else that has milestones that say like, you've reached this point, and you can get an idea of like, does this seem, well, this is about to get to the next one. Does it seem realistic? Oh, we're in the A. The R in smart, realistic, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about actionable goal, an example of an unactionable goal would be I'm going to manage to speak English like a native speaker somewhere next year, or something like I'm going to impress my native speaker classmates. Like, your goal needs to be tied to something that you yourself can do, and not something that is tied to what other people are gonna think or feel. Those are not something that you cannot do. So
yeah, also you can't expect to impress somebody by just one conversation, because to impress somebody, you usually have to show progress. So you talk to them and then come back a few months later and then talk to them again. That's usually something that would be like, if you learned a lot in between those times, then that could impress them. Most people, when you meet for the first time, you don't really impress right off the bat, because a native English speaker, they'll have already spoken the language, and the first time that they hear you, they'll just hear like, oh, this is just how well that person knows the language. So just going into and meeting a new person saying like, oh, and they're going to be so impressed by my English skills, that doesn't happen. They're just going to say, okay, this is a person that speaks English. Although sometimes if they don't, I am a little bit impressed by people who they are not a native speaker, but then when they talk to me, they have no accent. That's very rare. Usually those kinds of people, they grew up watching, there was one student, Chen, who he spoke just like a native English speaker, and I thought he was a native English speaker until he said, no, I grew up in China. And he said, yeah, I just watched a lot of American movies, and so that's how I learned. And he was speaking just like a normal person of Chinese heritage, but grew up in America. And I was like, wow, you have no accent whatsoever. I was really impressed by that the first time, but that's mostly because like that was not his native language, and he must have watched a lot of movies because he spoke very fluently. It actually threw me off. It confused me sometimes when I was talking to him, because because he spoke so much like a native English speaker, I spoke to him like a native English speaker, and I would use idioms. Like, it threw me off. That is something that I wouldn't expect people to understand, but if you're not a native English speaker, you wouldn't understand that. And I would use these things, and sometimes he would get confused, and he'd be like, what did you just say there? And I was like, you speak English. And that it's interesting speaking to him, because it's as if somebody knows perfect English but also doesn't know the idioms. It was a very strange experience. It was something I didn't. Anyway, he was a person who impressed me by how well he pronounced the language. pronunciation is one of the hardest things to do if you're not a native speaker. But
Yeah.
anyway, that was just on impressions.
An actionable goal will be I will learn English by watching a movie in English for an hour every single day. So that's like something that you are gonna do. And that can be that is like a smart objective because you are gonna be, you can act on it. And it depends only on you.
And with watching these English videos, it can help out a lot to watch these videos and try to record or copy what they're saying exactly. It can also help out a lot if you watch videos that describe how to make those pronunciations, because those are going to be the things that when people see what you're saying, when people, even if you know the language very well, a lot of people in the native language will judge how well you speak the language just by how you sound, not necessarily how you put together the words to make sentences and things like that, but how do you sound when you say them. If you can pronounce the language very well, generally many English speakers are much more willing to listen to what you have to say and correct any of the other things that you say in English just by having good pronunciation. So that when I'm practicing a language, when I'm practicing Spanish, that's one thing that I focus a lot on, is making sure my pronunciation is correct. So when you're watching language, watch videos like that. Not something that would be actionable. I will try to pronounce smart or heart as a native English speaker would, and you would just pronounce that one word until you have that pronunciation exactly like it sounds that other person. And you can just do one word at a time, because you'll notice a lot of words will have the same pronunciations as other ones. Like smart sounds a lot like heart. And so once you learn something like smart, you can then say, oh, heart, that's just like the word smart. And so it can actually make it so it's a bit easier to learn more words. Something that is actionable. Learn one word every day. How to pronounce one word exactly like a native speaker every day.
Yeah. The next part is realistic. So remember when I asked you to see what resources do you have, how much time do you have, what are the materials that you have, like if you can, where can you have access internet. Those are, you need to take those into account when you are going to be making a realistic goal. So a non-realistic goal would be, I will learn a new language every month. You can't.
This is what I was kind of talking about when you were looking at in 1 year from now, I'm going to learn a new language. Well, maybe that's possible, maybe that's not. But what you can do is like, okay, if this is a new language, you break it into, this is how much I'm going to have to learn every month. This is how much I'm going to have to learn every week. You can start practicing that new language, and you can see after 1 week or 1 month, is this an actual realistic goal? Or am I trying to do too much? One thing that I know Ans does is she tends to make a little bit unrealistic goals by saying, I'm going to post a video every week. And we had to sit down and talk about like, okay, it takes you this long to make a video. This is how many hours you put into it. This is how many free hours you have. And there was a big mismatch. You had something like, it was going to take you 16 hours a day in order to put out a video that you wanted to do. And you had maybe 8 hours a week or something. And it was like, this is not a realistic goal. So you want to that's why the things with milestones are very helpful, because they can help you say like, this is how much progress you made, and you can get an idea in a short amount of time. Like, this is how much I get done in a week, and then see how much that builds into after a year, and see, is this a realistic goal? Or do I have to say like, okay, I can't learn this language in a year, maybe 3 years? Is that, and try to make it more realistic. That's good to do the first few times while you're still trying to figure out how fast are you going to learn a language.
Yeah, so for our case, we committed to practice.
Committed. Yeah.
We committed to do Duolingo for 15 minutes twice a day. One in the morning after between 6 and 12, and one after 6 because of the post.
Yeah, and we also, let's see, in the morning, so every day, we drop our kid off at school, and then we would go to school, and once we're at school, that's when we do our Duolingo practice, and then we come, after all the day happens, we eat dinner, and then right after dinner, we do our Duolingo practice again, and so we're doing that practice, making sure it happens at those times. Once we arrive at school in the morning, and once again at night after we eat dinner. And like, those are our two things that, we're always going to go to school, and so we can make sure to always do the 15 minutes then. Sometimes I at least feel a lot of pressure to do other things, and sometimes I'll shorten that up, but I try to keep that to a minimum. But I also am not very good about, things that I do for as personal goals like these. I'm not as good about making sure I have the time for those. So those tend to be a little bit harder for me. But you keep me a little bit more honest about those.
And now, does your objective have heart? So the first thing is healthy. When you are setting up that objective of yours, you need to go and ask, will you still have time to do what you love doing and what you need to do? If you say that you were gonna do practice for 4 hours every day, you may not have time to go to the gym or do something fun, and that's what leads to burnout.
This was when you were trying to do the videos. I mean, these have more applications than just talking about what you're going to do in terms of a language. But when you were trying to do these videos, and you were getting very upset that you weren't posting enough videos, and I could tell you were getting burned out. This was the first thing that I noticed where I was like, we have to have a talk about this. You don't want all of your time to be consumed, because you'll see other people being able to do things and they have other advantages. For instance, for a language, they may be living in a place where they already speak English. And so they're practicing English every day, every minute, just by talking with the people who already are native English speakers in their area. So they're going to learn more than what you would be able to do if you were learning English in Madagascar, because it just is that people in Madagascar don't speak English all the time. When you talk to your friends, you're not talking to them in English. So some people will be able to do more than what you are just because of their situation. And so to put if you see somebody else learning faster than you, that may not be because they are more committed. It might just be their circumstances that forces them to learn more. If you have the opportunity, if you want to learn something like English, German, French, Spanish, and you want to learn it quickly, immersing yourself, going to that country is definitely going to be better, and it'll be healthier for you to learn it than it would be to stay in Madagascar and try to learn it from there. But it's also more difficult. But don't try to, if you see somebody and you're saying this is my goal, you don't have to do what somebody else is doing and say that is what I need to do and set unhealthy goals. You need to make sure that they're realistic in terms of what you can do.
The next one is your objective enduring? Is it motivating enough for you to keep you going till the end? So this, like, if we still go back to like the future self, like if you put that work to defining like the future self who speak that language, that should be something that you are motivated to become. Because if you are not motivated to become, that's also gonna lead you to like burnout, and you are gonna be there and you are doing all of those things, but you are not gonna be enjoying it because it's not something that is actually motivating you.
Something about motivation is it's always good to have reminders of why you're being motivated. And that sheet where it's, if I don't speak this language, I'm missing out on, and if I speak this language, I will be able to. Those are going to be like your reminders about what is your motivation. And when you have those reminders, you'll be able to say, okay, yes, I'm going to be able to do this because I'll be able to talk to this person. Like if you know someone who speaks the language, like if you already know somebody who speaks English, you can go to them and say, you can just speak to them in English. Like a native English speaker will love to speak in their native language. So you can go to them and you can speak in English, and you can try to see how far you can carry the conversation. Also, if you're in Madagascar or in France and you're trying to learn English or something like that, then it may end up being that you're trying to speak to them in English, and then they're trying to learn Malagasy, and they're speaking to you in Malagasy, which is completely fine. You can speak to them in English, and then they'll speak to you in Malagasy, and you're kind of helping each other speak in each other's language. In English, in America, just south of us, we have Mexico. And so we have on the border of the United States and Mexico, we have what's called Spanglish. It's where people kind of do that same kind of thing, but it's transformed into this thing where it's both Spanish and English combined together into one language, because people do this in order to figure out how to communicate in the other language. So you get people who will speak in English, switch to Spanish, switch to English, all within one sentence. And that is also something that I actually get a little bit impressed by, people who speak Spanglish, because they can speak English without an accent, they can speak Spanish without an accent, and then they can switch between the two, and they can speak English without accent, Spanish, and English without accent, and the entire thing is just like, wow, I can't believe how fast I can change from one language to another and back again. That is something that's very impressive, partially because I know how hard it is to switch from one language to another. But being able to talk to, if you have somebody that speaks the language, seeing them and saying, like, I'm going to be able to talk to them, that's going to be your motivation. You want your motivation, whatever that is, if you can, have it throughout your day, reminders of your motivation, and you can say, this is why. Even better if your motivation makes you talk in the native language. Like if there's an English person, an English speaker, then you can go up to them and speak in English for a little bit, and that can be your motivation to try to carry that conversation. Not only is it motivating, but it's also getting you to practice. And that's part of the ancient heart, trying to get it to be more healthy.
Yeah. The next one is, are you excited about it? Like, if it's not something that you are excited about, maybe you shouldn't.
When I was learning a language, I always imagined that people were saying in books or out loud, saying something in the other language that they weren't saying in English, which usually not, but it was always something that I was like, I'm going to understand what they're saying, and then I'm going to know the secret inside joke that they're talking about.
Yeah. So just read the goal and make sure that it's something that you are really excited about. And very close to that is that objective relevant to your situation? Like when you were saying, that you were gonna learn, practice doing, practice learning for 4 hours a day. Like, is it relevant? Is that what you should be doing right now? Sometimes maybe you are still trying to finish your thesis, and that may be what you should prioritize, because if you get a degree, then you can get a job, and when you get a job, then you will be able to upgrade your phone, for example, and you, instead of like using that pen and paper thing, you can use an app. So seeing what is relevant to your situation right now really help you learn the language faster.
Yeah, some things that might be relevant is your goal might be not even to speak the language, but be able to edit papers in English. And so you may not have to speak it, but it's definitely more relevant to know the syntax, know how to write in proper English.
Yeah.
So in that case, speaking the language, knowing the pronunciation may not be relevant, but knowing how to where to put punctuation, what to capitalize, how things are spoken properly is much more relevant to what you need to know for your goal.
Definitely. And the last thing is truth. Do you really, really want to achieve this goal? It may be something that is still exciting, it may still be relevant, but do you really want it? And is that the language that you want to learn? Or is just like other people in your life are saying that this language is good and you are just gonna do it to please them? Because if it's not what you truly want inside of you, you're still gonna feel like an emptiness and you will not be fulfilled even if you achieve that goal, because that was not your goal to begin with.
With learning Spanish, one of the things that I wanted to do when I was first learning it, not only talk to my family, but I figured the other thing is I want to be able to go to as many places as I can and be understood and independent there. Turns out most places speak English, so that I already knew English, so that was one language I was like, all right, I know the most common language, English. But the second most common language, I think, was Chinese, which is very drastically different than English. And so I kind of said, I know that's the next most common, but that's largely because there's a lot of people in China. And also it is very difficult for an English speaker to learn Chinese. The way that they speak is drastically different. So I said, okay, not Chinese. The next one is actually Spanish, the next most common. And so that became, while I was learning Spanish already for my family, that kind of became like, oh, this is a really good secondary goal. You go to a country that speaks Spanish, not everybody speaks, like a decent amount of people speak English, but there's also some people who don't speak English, my native language. So when I go there, I want to know Spanish to be able to communicate with those people. A lot of those people tend to be like the street vendors and things like that. I wouldn't be able to bargain. I would just have... They were talking about, when an American goes into the store, they just point to this and be like, this one, eso. And other people, and they would like hold up a calculator and they would say like, they would just type in a number, and they would say that would be like them showing the price for the item, and then you would hand over the calculator, and then they would type in a price, and then it would be like you would use the calculator to barter and say the number. But if you knew the language, it would be much easier to communicate. You would be able to do a lot better. But that was something that I realized that kind of became a goal, something that motivated me to learn the Spanish language. But that was also after I started to learn it. I had a different.
Yeah.
Now I have two strong motivations to do it.
So now it's your turn to craft your learning objective, and I see 3 people are watching on Facebook. So can you drop on the comments like a draft of your goal? I will appreciate that.
And it'll take a minute for that to come up, so we can continue going on with these.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about those when we see them in the comments.
Yeah, definitely. So when you have the goal and you already are sure that it is smart and it has hard, so yeah, it's rhymed perfectly.
That may not have been a coincidence.